You may remember during the pandemic, there was so much fake information, so much fake news. And one of the responses to that was the organization COVID Comms, a group of people, communications practitioners, PR people, who tried to ensure that the information in the public domain about the virus and how to keep you safe was accurate. Now, a similar group of people are trying to do the same for electricity when you consider this crisis that we're in. They're calling themselves Energy Comms. Chris Vick is the chair of Energy Comms. Chris, good afternoon to you. We remember the work you did around COVID Comms. What are you trying to do with this organization?
Good afternoon, Stephen. The same approach. We've found we have very solid networks within civil society and in some communities. And there's a real lack of understanding around things that we probably take for granted, like load shedding. What is load shedding? Why does it happen? Why does it happen when it happens? So we're using the same principles we developed during COVID comms and taking those fairly complex concepts and explaining them to people in plain language, high impact, so we use infographics and videos. And we're translating as much of our work as we can, currently working in Sepedi, isiZulu, Afrikaans and English, and hoping to expand. So same principles, because we see the same sort of problems, not just misinformation, but that a lot of the language used and a lot of the communication that takes place is actually quite alienating. I mean, I see the ESCOM updates about how many megawatts or gigawatts are available. It doesn't mean anything to me, and I think many people are in that situation. We want to help them understand it, so that they can, voice their opinions and keep an eye on what government's doing to improve the situation.
Some things are really hard to explain simply. I mean, just the argument about why there's load shedding. You could start in 1998, you could start in 2007, you could start in sort of 2015. You could blame this person, that cabinet, these people, that president, this president, a former president, and even a couple in the middle. It does make it quite complicated. I mean, I find as someone who talks about it a lot on air, quite difficult to explain sometimes what's actually going on, just because there are so many important facts to it.
Well, we've produced our first video this week, which is on our website, energycomms.co.za. And we built it around a conversation between a parent and a child being confused as to why the lights go on and off all the time. And the explanation that is provided is history, but in a very simplistic, very simple, easy to understand way. And that the consequence of these things that have been wrong in the past is that we have to share power. We don't refer to load shedding. We talk about scheduled power cuts because we feel language like that is more understandable. That if you have to do without power for 4 hours, it's because somebody else needs that power for 4 hours. That's the approach that we're taking to, in a sense, stay away from the politics where it's at all possible. Focus on the science and focus on the reality that people have. For example, our next video is around where energy comes from. Why are we using coal? What are the benefits of solar power? What are the benefits of nuclear power, etc.? It's really trying to create a very basic understanding of the energy crisis and then pointing towards the sort of solutions that government is looking at in the Energy Action Plan. That's the approach we've taken in a very basic form. And it's landing well because I think, as with COVID, we make a lot of assumptions about what people know and what their understanding is. And we found if you sort of go back to the building blocks of the conversation, use language that people can understand, and use things like explainer videos, which is our core focus, that really does begin to have an impact. And I think the more we can build an understanding of the problem and the possible solutions, the more people will participate in those conversations. Because for us, that's always important. I mean, we're activists at heart, and we want people to be able to make informed decisions about the energy choices government is making and to know the pros and cons of the different aspects of the energy mix.
Is there a problem with a lot of sort of deliberate fake news out there? I mean, during the pandemic, it was easier, I think, maybe because life seemed a bit simpler, I mean scarier, but simpler, to know what was true and what was not. And then we also spoke to a lot of scientists, and the scientists didn't really have a political agenda. The same may not be true about electricity. Is there a lot of sort of deliberate misinformation around electricity? Are you seeing that?
Definitely. I mean, it happens mainly in your space, in the mainstream media and on social media. And the kind of urban legends develop. I'll give you an example. I mean, there are these constant images of trucks of coal queuing at Richards Bay coal terminal. And the mythology that's developed is that we shouldn't be exporting that coal. We should use it in our power stations and we won't have power cuts. So the approach we take is to counter that with facts, to explain that coal is of a different quality. It's best used in other areas of the economy rather than in South African power stations. So I guess, again, similar to the approach we took with COVID, not engage with the misinformation, but provide facts. And we're fortunate in that, in the same way we had advisory teams and experts during COVID, there are a lot of quite smart people in the energy space at the moment who don't necessarily have agendas. They're not part of the coal lobby. They don't have interest in solar businesses, etc. And that's the kind of energy, sorry about the pun, but that's the energy that we tap into and get a rounded view. I mean, we've always taken the approach that there's no single answer to many of these questions. So we consult with NEDLAC, with government, with the trade union movement, with civil society organizations, and firstly understand what the misconceptions are, and then test different ways of addressing those misconceptions through focus groups, dealing with our community facilitators, and bouncing them off other people who are doing similar work.
There's a lot of controversy around energy. I don't need to tell you that, Chris. And it is, I think, a lot more politicized in terms of South African domestic politics than COVID ever was. I mean, I don't think there was anyone in government who disagreed with the stance of our health department during COVID, for example, with the stance of the president, or if they were very quiet about it. The same is not really true of electricity. I mean, I'm not really sure who's in charge, except that from what I can see, Kgosientsho Ramokgopa is not in charge because he still doesn't have, any legal powers. Are you worried that you might end up, despite your best efforts, getting caught into it? I mean, Gwede Mantashe sometimes says things that scientists and very smart people disagree with. Sometimes I think Ramokgopa does the same. Sometimes I think Minister Gordon also does the same. It gets quite complicated sometimes.
It does. I mean, we're not underestimating the challenge, but around COVID, you remember the vaccine information, disinformation, denialists, right? We're used to that. We've been there. We've seen different agendas at play. In the case of energy, there's NICOM, the National Electricity Crisis Committee. There is an energy action plan. That for us is the reference group in terms of what is the reference point in terms of what is supposed to happen and in terms of what the plans are. But I think by sticking to the facts and providing explainers, that is our way of navigating through that space. Obviously, as issues pop up, we're not doing tactical interventions. We're doing a very deliberate campaign to build people's understanding. People who are fortunate to have electricity, but unfortunate in that the electricity is often cut off, to explain why that's happening, to explain what the options are. And to focus on what that plan, that energy action plan stipulates into the mix. But we're also monitoring it. I mean, we've developed a sort of easy-to-read version of the energy action plan so people know what is supposed to happen. And we're putting a live tracker on our website so people can see, in terms of the 5 focus areas of the energy action plan, what is happening. Is the solar capacity being increased? Are we getting more energy from neighboring countries, etc., and focusing on that rather than getting distracted by the politics, the agendas, wherever possible, and the specific lobby groups that exist.
Chris Vick, thank you. Chairperson of Energy Comms. Really do appreciate the time.